You're probably thinking this is some kind of sick joke, but I swear every word is true. I was just a normal guy, a little introverted, spending most of my nights buried in the depths of the internet, browsing random forums and occasionally getting lost in the dark corners of the web. It's a strange place, filled with shadows and whispers, but that night was different. It all started when I stumbled across a link labeled "Livestream, your future awaits." I had heard of the dark web but never dared to venture too deep. Curiosity got the better of me though. I clicked the link and my screen flickered to life. It was a live stream showing a dimly lit room that looked like a cross between a basement and a dungeon. I felt my stomach churn as I squinted at the grainy image. There was a man sitting in the center, but he looked wrong. He had the same build as me, the same messy hair, but his eyes were wild, almost feral. He wore a ragged shirt stained with something dark and sticky that made my skin crawl. I leaned in closer, heart racing, thinking it was some kind of sick prank. But the longer I watched, the more I realized this was no joke. The stream was live, and as I stared, the man started talking. "I'm you, from the future." His voice was raw, shaky, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in years. I remember laughing nervously, thinking I'd stumbled onto some elaborate performance art piece. But then he continued, his eyes darting around the room, and the panic in his voice sent chills down my spine. "They're coming for you. You need to listen to me. If you don't, you'll end up like this." He gestured wildly, and I saw the walls covered in what looked like newspaper clippings and strange symbols. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Every instinct screamed at me to turn away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, locked in by fear and intrigue. As he talked, he revealed things I had never shared with anyone, secrets I thought were buried deep within me. "Remember that time you didn't help that girl at the bus stop? It haunts you, doesn't it?" The words hit me like a slap. I had been walking home late one night and I'd seen a girl being harassed by some creeps. I'd convinced myself it wasn't my problem. But now, hearing my own voice echo back at me, I felt sick. The man continued, revealing more of my past, but then he shifted into something darker. "They'll find you if you don't change your ways," he hissed, eyes wide with terror. "You'll be trapped in this hell. I can't escape it. I can't." His words turned into frantic sobs and my heart raced as I watched him break down. Suddenly, there was a loud bang off camera and the man flinched. My heart dropped as I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows behind him. It looked like a figure, but the lighting was so poor I couldn't make it out. All I knew was that it felt wrong, like something that shouldn't exist. "You have to run!" he screamed, his voice cracking as he fell to the floor. "They're here! They're coming for you!" I felt a pit in my stomach, but all I could do was watch. I wanted to scream, to reach out, to help, but I was powerless. The stream started to glitch, the screen flickering in and out as the man crawled backward, his eyes darting toward the darkness behind him. It felt like I was watching a live execution, and I couldn't pull myself away. Then it happened. The figure stepped into the dim light, and I felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was a woman, her face twisted into a grotesque grin, her eyes hollow and soulless. I had never seen anyone look so inhuman. She moved with an unnatural speed, lunging at him. I screamed at my screen, begging him to get up, to do anything but stay there. But then the stream cut out, leaving me in darkness. My heart raced as I stared at the blank screen, my mind reeling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed something horrific. It wasn't a prank or a performance, it was real. The thought that this was a glimpse into my future clawed at my sanity. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I had just seen. I couldn't sleep that night, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face. I felt a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. The more I thought about it, the more I started to believe him. What if my future self was right? What if I didn't change my ways? It's been days since I found that stream, and the more I dig into the dark web, the more I uncover. There are whispers of something sinister, something that tracks you if you're not careful. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that they're coming for me. I've started to change my routines, to avoid places I used to frequent, but what if it's too late? Every night, I sit up wondering if I'll wake up to a live stream of my future self again. I don't know what's waiting for me, but I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something terrifying, and I'm not sure I can escape it. This is just the beginning. I have to find out what happened to him and how to prevent it from happening to me. But every time I think about it, I hear his voice in my head, echoing through my thoughts. They're coming for you. And I can't help but wonder, what if I'm already too late? I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of my floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside my window sent my heart racing. I tried to distract myself with work and regular life, but the weight of what I had seen clung to me like a thick fog. I couldn't go back to that live stream, but the thought of it consumed me. I had to know more. I dove deeper into the dark web, searching for clues about that mysterious live stream, about the man I saw who looked like me and the woman with the twisted grin. I ended up on some obscure forum where people discussed strange occurrences, supernatural events, and the darker aspects of the internet. It was a breeding ground for fear and paranoia, and I found myself drowning in the stories. One post caught my eye. A user claimed they had encountered something similar, a live stream showing future versions of people, but they never ended well. The stories were always the same. People went missing, only to resurface months later, looking hollow, like they had seen things that changed them forever. I couldn't breathe as I read through the responses, people sharing their theories about the dark web being a gateway to something more sinister, something that feeds off fear and despair. I couldn't help but dig deeper. I started visiting sketchy chat rooms where people exchanged information about hidden links and potential live streams. Each entry was more disturbing than the last, filled with tales of lost souls, people who had vanished without a trace, and whispers of something lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I found myself in a chat with a user named Wraithwatcher. They seemed to know a lot about the darker side of the web and were eager to share their insights. After chatting for a while, I asked about live streams and if they'd ever come across anything like the one I saw. Their response chilled me to the bone. They say once you see one, you can't unsee it. It changes you. Be careful. It watches. At that moment, I felt the cold grip of fear tighten around my chest. I thought about what I had seen, the raw terror in my future self's eyes, and the way he begged me to change my ways. What did that mean? Did I have to change everything about myself, or was it already too late? A few days later, after endless scrolling and searching, I came across a link titled "The Stream of Secrets." My pulse quickened. It was a hidden site that promised to reveal the truth behind the dark web's live streams. The description warned of dire consequences for those who dared to enter. But I was too far gone, caught in the web of curiosity and dread. I clicked it, the screen loading slowly, the darkness creeping in. The page was bare, just a black background with a single video player in the center. My heart raced as I hit play. The screen flickered to life, revealing a similar dimly lit room as before. This time, it was different. I wasn't alone. There were other faces staring back at me through the screen, all wide-eyed and terrified, trapped in the same way I was. They were future versions of themselves, each one lost in despair, looking like they'd been drained of life. I realized I was watching a live stream of multiple people, each sitting in isolated rooms, just like the man I had seen before. Their eyes darted around as if they were anticipating something horrific, something I could almost feel crawling just beneath the surface. One woman began to cry, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Please help us. We didn't believe. We thought it was a joke." Her anguish cut through the screen like a knife, and I felt my heart drop. I tried to type a message in the chat, asking if anyone knew what was happening, but the chat was flooded with desperate cries for help, each message drowning in a sea of terror. Then I noticed the time on the stream. It was counting down. My stomach turned as the realization hit me. This wasn't just a live stream. It was a countdown to something terrible. Panic surged through me as I watched the seconds tick down. What happens when the timer hits 0? I thought frantically. The woman from before looked at the camera, her eyes pleading. You have to warn everyone, get out while you can. But before she could say anything more, the screen glitched, and her image was replaced by static. I felt sick, paralyzed by fear and dread. I couldn't look away. I watched as the timer reached 10 seconds, my heart pounding in my chest. And then the lights in the room went out, plunging everything into darkness. The screams started almost immediately. They echoed through the room like a chorus of pure terror, and I could feel my own scream building in my throat. The screen flickered back to life, and I gasped at the scene before me. The people were gone. The room was empty, save for the shadows that moved in the corners, writhing like something alive. A low, guttural growl resonated through the speakers, making my skin crawl. It was the sound of something hungry, something that fed off despair and fear. Then I saw it, a figure standing in the darkness watching. It was tall and thin, its features indistinguishable, but I could feel its eyes boring into me, through the screen, straight into my soul. The last thing I heard was that same woman's voice whispering, "You should have listened." Before I could react, the stream abruptly cut out. I was left staring at a blank screen, my heart racing, every nerve in my body on high alert. I sat in the darkness, gasping for breath, trying to process what I had just witnessed. What had I stumbled into? I was convinced now that it wasn't just a game or a trick. This was something far more malevolent. My thoughts raced. I couldn't help but wonder, was this the future that awaited me? Would I become one of those people, trapped in a dark room, waiting for the end to come? With each passing minute, the weight of despair pressed down on me harder. I knew I had to act, but what could I do? I needed answers, and I needed to escape this nightmare. But the dark web was calling to me, and every fiber of my being screamed that I was being pulled deeper into its grasp. I had to find out what it all meant. I had to confront whatever awaited me in the shadows. Little did I know, the next step I took would lead me into a nightmare far worse than anything I could have ever imagined. I spent the next few days on edge, half expecting the figure from the live stream to materialize in my room. Every time my phone buzzed or I heard a car drive by, I jumped, convinced it was someone or something coming for me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the dark web was a predator, and I was its next meal. I was losing my grip on reality, but I couldn't stop myself from searching for answers. The forums were buzzing with speculation about the live streams I had seen. I noticed more users sharing their experiences, detailing how they had stumbled upon similar feeds that showed their future selves in dire situations. Some claimed they had managed to escape, but their descriptions were riddled with horror. They spoke of dark figures that hunted them, whispered secrets that drove them mad, and voices that echoed in their minds long after they closed their laptops. One post, in particular, stood out. A user named Fallen Angel wrote about a ritual that could supposedly sever ties with the dark web and erase the consequences of seeing your future. They described a method involving salt, candles, and a chant to ward off the entities that preyed on souls like mine. As desperate as I was, it sounded absurd, but I had nothing left to lose. I printed out the instructions and gathered the supplies, hoping this would somehow cleanse me of whatever curse I felt I had unwittingly taken on. That night, I prepared the ritual in my living room, which felt more like a cell than a safe haven. I lit the candles, their flickering flames casting strange shadows that danced across the walls, making the space feel even more claustrophobic. I spread the salt in a circle, feeling like a fool but driven by desperation. I muttered the chant I had memorized, my voice trembling as I tried to keep my mind focused. As I recited the words, the air grew heavy, thick with an unseen tension. A cold breeze swept through the room, extinguishing one of the candles. I fought the urge to bolt but pressed on, my voice growing louder, more insistent. But as I reached the climax of the chant, I felt a presence. Something was watching, lurking just beyond the perimeter of my salt circle. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, and I spun around, heart racing. I thought I saw that same tall figure from the stream standing by the doorway, its outline barely visible. It stood still, as if waiting for me to break the circle. Panic surged within me, and I shouted the last lines of the chant, desperate to hold on to whatever sanity I had left. The candle flared back to life, illuminating the room for a brief moment before plunging me into darkness once more. I felt a rush of air, and then the oppressive silence returned. Had it worked? I stood there, breathless, staring into the void, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Minutes passed, but nothing occurred. I convinced myself it was over, that I had succeeded in banishing whatever had been lurking. But I was wrong. That night, sleep evaded me. I lay in bed, drenched in sweat, replaying every moment of the ritual. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally pulled me under, and I drifted into a restless sleep filled with nightmares. I found myself back in that dark room from the stream, surrounded by the faceless figures from before. They all stared at me, their mouths moving in silent screams. I felt a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. When I finally woke up, the sun was high in the sky and I felt disoriented. But something was off. My phone buzzed beside me, a notification lighting up the screen. I grabbed it, only to see a message from Wraithwatcher. "They're coming. You didn't listen. Get out before it's too late." My heart sank. I had thought I was safe, but the sheer dread that coursed through my veins told me otherwise. I scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window. Outside, the world looked normal, but I felt an overwhelming urge to run. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay in that house, surrounded by shadows that felt all too real. I threw on some clothes and bolted out the door, heart racing as I made my way to my car. I needed to get as far away from the place that had become a breeding ground for my nightmares. I drove aimlessly, each turn taking me further from home and deeper into a fog of fear. But then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen to see a blocked number. My instincts screamed to ignore it, but I answered anyway. A voice came through, distorted and shaky. "You have to listen. They know where you are. They're watching you." "Who is this?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. "Your future self," the voice rasped, barely audible over static. "I couldn't escape. I thought I could warn you, but it's too late. You have to go to the place in your dreams. You'll find the answers there." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding in my ears. The place in my dreams. What the hell did that mean? But deep down, I knew. I had seen it in my nightmares, a darkened room with a single flickering bulb and walls covered in those grotesque images. I could feel my breath hitch as I remembered the faces, their eyes pleading for help. I had to go there, but the thought terrified me. I could feel the presence from the dark web creeping into my thoughts, clawing at my sanity. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. This was the only chance I had to confront whatever awaited me. I made a U-turn, my resolve hardening. As I drove, I felt the weight of dread grow heavier, like a shroud tightening around me. The world outside the car blurred into a series of colors and shapes as I lost myself in thought. I wondered what I would find in that place. Would it be the answers I sought or the nightmare I feared? When I finally arrived, I parked on a deserted road, staring at the entrance of an abandoned building that had haunted my dreams. The walls were crumbling, the windows shattered, yet there was a pulse of energy radiating from within. It felt alive, and my skin prickled with anxiety. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car, the cold air biting into my skin. As I approached the entrance, I could hear a faint humming sound like a low, ominous chant. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway that seemed to stretch into infinity. With every step I took, the humming grew louder, resonating in my bones, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I had come too far to turn back now. Whatever awaited me inside was a mystery I needed to solve. I stepped over the threshold, ready to confront my fears. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would unravel the very fabric of my existence. As I crossed the threshold, the air shifted around me, thickening like a dense fog. The humming sound enveloped me, vibrating through the walls and shaking the ground beneath my feet. I felt a pulse, an echo of something alive, something that had been waiting for me. I stepped cautiously, the floor creaking beneath my weight, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence that followed. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, illuminated by a flickering light bulb that swung gently above me. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that made me question my sanity. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the very walls were alive and eager to consume me. Each step forward was a battle against the urge to turn and flee, but I forced myself onward. I reached a door at the end of the hall, battered and warped, but it was slightly ajar, as if inviting me in. Hesitating for a moment, I pushed it open, and the hinges groaned in protest. The room beyond was dimly lit, the source of the humming now clearer. A circle of candles flickered in the center, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The sight before me made my stomach churn. The walls were covered in crude drawings and symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. I recognized some of them from the images in the live stream, the same symbols that had adorned my future self's room. The air was thick with a metallic scent, and the faint sound of whispering filled the room, sending chills down my spine. In the center of the candle circle lay an old, tattered book, its pages yellowed and brittle. I felt drawn to it, compelled to uncover the secrets it held. As I reached for the book, the whispers grew louder, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. I strained to hear, catching fragments of words. "Help us. It's coming. You shouldn't be here." Ignoring the warning signs, I flipped the book open. The pages were filled with sketches of the same figures I had seen, the tall, shadowy entity, the woman with the twisted grin, and others that seemed to writhe and shift on the page. Each illustration was accompanied by notes scribbled in a frantic scrawl, detailing rituals, sacrifices, and the cost of knowledge. My hands trembled as I read the words, feeling a weight pressing down on me as the realization dawned. This book was a guide to the dark web's horrors, a manual on how to navigate its depths, and ultimately, how to escape it. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I felt a cold breath on my neck. I spun around, my heart racing, but the room was empty. I was alone, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. The whispers swelled into a roar, echoing in my mind. I couldn't think straight. Panic surged through me. I slammed the book shut, but the noise continued, wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. In that moment, a figure emerged from the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized it. It was my future self. But he was different now, his eyes wide with madness, his face gaunt and hollow. The clothes he wore were torn and filthy, and he seemed to be shaking uncontrollably. "You shouldn't have come here," he gasped, voice cracking. "You have to leave. They'll take you next." "Who will?" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "What's happening? What do you mean?" "They're always watching. They feed on your fear, your doubts. They know you've seen too much," he warned, his voice barely a whisper. "This place, it's a trap. It'll keep you here forever. You have to go." Before I could respond, the lights flickered violently, and the room began to distort. The shadows stretched and twisted, warping into grotesque shapes that loomed closer, inching toward us. I felt my mind unraveling as the whispers crescendoed into a deafening chorus, drowning out my thoughts. I turned back to my future self, but he was gone, replaced by a swirling darkness that consumed everything. Panic surged, and I bolted toward the door, desperate to escape. As I reached for the handle, a cold hand gripped my wrist, pulling me back. I screamed, thrashing wildly, but the grip was unyielding. I twisted around, and there she was, the woman from the stream, her face contorted into that horrifying grin. "You're not leaving," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "You're one of us now." I felt despair clawing at my insides as I fought against her grip. I kicked and pushed, but it was no use. The darkness enveloped me, pulling me deeper into its maw. I could hear the whispers again, clearer this time. "Join us, join us," they chanted, a haunting lullaby that seeped into my bones. With a surge of adrenaline, I tore myself free and stumbled backward. I ran through the door, desperate to escape, but the shadows clawed at me, wrapping around my legs, dragging me down. I could feel the cold seep into my skin, filling me with dread. I had to break free. I sprinted down the hallway, the walls closing in around me as I struggled to find the exit. The whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts, becoming a chorus of despair that threatened to pull me under. "You'll never escape," they taunted. "You've seen too much." I burst through the front door and into the light, gasping for breath, heart pounding in my chest. I collapsed on the ground, disoriented and shaking. But even outside, the feeling of being watched didn't fade. It lingered like a heavy fog, suffocating and relentless. I looked back at the building, the whispers still echoing in my ears, the shadows stretching from the entrance like a beckoning hand. I knew then that I hadn't escaped. The darkness had seeped into me, and I could feel it coiling around my mind, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I couldn't go back home, not yet. I needed to figure out how to sever the connection, how to cleanse myself of the darkness that threatened to consume me. But with every passing moment, I felt myself slipping closer to the edge, the boundaries between reality and nightmare blurring until I didn't know which was which. And I was terrified that soon I might not be able to tell the difference at all. I stumbled away from the building, my mind racing, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I felt the weight of the darkness wrapping around me, pressing in on all sides. Every corner seemed to hide a shadow that could leap out at any moment. And I could hear the whispers growing fainter but still taunting, still echoing in my mind. I knew I couldn't return home. The shadows would follow me, and I was terrified of what might happen if I let them in again. I had to find help, someone who could understand what I was going through. I drove to the nearest city, my hands trembling on the steering wheel, eyes darting nervously to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that woman's twisted grin staring back at me. As I drove, I recalled the stories I had read about people who had come into contact with the dark web and the horrors that followed. Many had turned to psychics or mediums, searching for ways to break free from the chains of darkness. It sounded absurd, but I was desperate. I pulled into a small town and found a rundown psychic shop, the signs swinging eerily in the wind. Inside, the air was thick with incense and a heavy sense of foreboding. An older woman with a knowing gaze sat behind a table covered in crystal balls and tarot cards. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice calm yet unsettling. "You seek to sever the ties, don't you?" "Please," I gasped, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need help. I've seen things that shouldn't exist. I think it's following me." She studied me with piercing eyes, and I felt my heart race. The dark web has many secrets, and it doesn't let go easily. The shadows you've encountered have marked you. They feed on fear, and they will stop at nothing to keep you trapped. I shivered at her words, my skin crawling. "How do I get rid of it? I can't live like this." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You must confront what you've seen. The darkness feeds on your fear, and to sever the connection, you must reclaim your power. It won't be easy, but you have to return to where it all began." My blood ran cold. "Back to the building?" "Yes," she nodded. "But you must not go alone. You need to face the truth of what you saw, and you must be prepared to fight." I left the shop feeling more terrified than ever, but I couldn't ignore her words. I knew I had to go back. I reached out to a friend, someone I trusted, and told him everything. He didn't believe me at first, but the urgency in my voice eventually convinced him to come along.
As we drove back to that sinister place, I felt the tension in the air thicken, the weight of inevitability settling over me like a shroud. My friend remained quiet, eyes scanning the horizon as if he could see the shadows lurking just out of sight. When we arrived, the building loomed before us, a dark monolith that felt alive, pulsating with a malevolent energy. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my throat, but I couldn't turn back now. We entered together, the familiar humming sound vibrating through the air. Inside, the shadows clung to the corners, and I felt a chill run down my spine as we made our way to the room where I had encountered my future self. The oppressive atmosphere grew heavier with each step, the whispers intensifying until they became a deafening roar in my mind. "Join us!" they chanted. "You're one of us!" I could feel the panic rising again, but I forced myself to focus. I had to confront what I had seen, had to face my future. I entered the room, and my breath hitched at the sight before me. The candle circle was still there, flickering ominously, and the book lay open, as if waiting for me. As I stepped closer, I felt a rush of cold air, and the figure emerged from the shadows. This time, it was more than just my future self. There were others, faces I recognized from the stream, trapped and twisted in despair, their eyes wide with fear. "You shouldn't have come back," my future self shouted, but there was no time for hesitation. I reached for the book, determined to reclaim my power. "You don't own me," I yelled, trying to drown out the whispers that clawed at my sanity. The moment my fingers brushed the pages, a surge of energy shot through me, and the room shook violently. The shadows writhed, twisting into monstrous shapes that lunged at me, their mouths opening wide, filled with darkness. "Feed us!" they roared, their voices a cacophony of anguish and rage. I felt my friend grab my arm, pulling me back, but I wouldn't let go. "We need to finish this!" I shouted. I opened the book, frantically scanning for the words that could break the spell. I began to chant the words I had memorized from the ritual, my voice rising above the chaos.
As I spoke, the shadows lunged closer, but I held my ground. I felt a warmth spreading through me, pushing back against the darkness. The figures around me began to fade, their faces twisted in anguish as they realized I was fighting back. "No!" they screamed, their voices mingling with the whispers in a crescendo of terror. The energy surged, and with a final cry, I shouted the last words of the chant. The room exploded in light, blinding and pure, consuming the darkness that had wrapped around me for so long. The shadows screamed, echoing in the void as they dissipated, their power waning under the onslaught of light. And then, silence. I stood in the center of the room, panting, trembling as the candles flickered back to life. My friend looked at me wide-eyed, relief flooding his expression. "You did it," he whispered, awe filling his voice. But as I looked around, I knew it wasn't truly over. The experience had changed me, left scars that would take time to heal. I could still feel the remnants of fear coiling in my mind, whispering dark thoughts that lingered in the corners of my consciousness. I had escaped, but I knew the shadows were always lurking, waiting for the next moment of weakness. We left the building, stepping into the daylight, and I took a deep breath of fresh air, grateful to be free. But as we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt a shiver run down my spine. The shadows had not disappeared entirely. They were still there, waiting. I could see them in the distance, creeping closer, a reminder of the darkness I had faced and the ongoing battle I would have to fight every day. As I drove away, I resolved to live my life differently, to confront my fears rather than hide from them. The dark web had shown me the edge of a nightmare, and I had survived. But I knew I had to stay vigilant, for the shadows never truly fade. They merely wait for the right moment to strike again. And now, as I sit here writing this, I can't shake the feeling that they are still watching, waiting for me to falter, to let my guard down. The dark web is a realm of nightmares, and though I may have escaped this time, I know the darkness is always lurking just beyond the light.